Welcome to this live session hosted by Fab, your insurance broker and moving to France expert. Fab is like your immigration GP. We're here to answer all your questions: visas, residency, healthcare, driving, taxes, properties, and much more. We navigate the complexities of France to help you embrace the French lifestyle you've always imagined. Although we are experts in the immigration industry and have been working in this space since 2015, none of what we say should be considered legal or financial advice. It is also worth noting that the immigration industry is an ever-evolving field, so things that are relevant today might be outdated or inaccurate when you actually move to France. Fab's main source of revenue is insurance through our brand, Fab French Insurance. Our main goal is to ultimately help you move to France, as we only sell insurance to clients applying for a visa, a residency permit, or those with a French address. During this session, you can ask any questions you want. However, we will not answer long questions to keep the pace fast. We also won't be able to address questions related to personal or very specific issues, but rest assured, we can get in touch after this session to either advise or refer you to one of our trusted partners. And now it's time to get this event started. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find our answers valuable. Our greatest reward would be to be a part of your journey to moving to France. And hopefully, it starts with this session today. We will pause briefly to allow all registrants to join. The session will begin shortly.
And we're back. Thank you for waiting. Thank you all for joining with us tonight, or again this morning. Today, we are glad to have with us Ben and Tommy and Nani. So two American expats. Oh, no, sorry. Two American citizens, Nani and Tommy, and Ben from the UK. So Ben and Tommy, maybe you can turn on your cameras and say hello to everyone. Hello. So
welcome.
Yeah, we'll discuss about so investing into France or buying a French property. So before we get the question started, I'd like, if possible, the panel to introduce themselves. Maybe we can start with you, Ben.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Fab. What a great intro video too. That really got me going for this. I think it's going to be a really good show. Hi, everyone. My name's Ben Small. I've been helping British and American expats move to France since 2016, having made the trip twice myself. That's moving over as a kid, then back to the UK, then back to France again, and then back to the UK again. So lots of boomeranging on my side, and I understand how stressful such a jump can be. My specialism is currency exchange, although I've been delving into property transactions for the most part. So hopefully I can share as much as I can on this. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Ben. And yes, I've seen Ben help many of our clients with securing a property rentals for the visas, for example, opening bank accounts. I mean, you've undersold yourself because you do, well, quite a lot and really brilliant services. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Tommy, please, can you introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. I'm Tommy Sikes. I am the founder of Traveltirements, which is a YouTube channel, and I have a weekly newsletter that goes out every Saturday morning. And like a lot of people probably in this audience, I am an aspiring expat. So for the past couple of years, I've been researching properties in Italy and France, and learning the process myself, and then sharing that with people who are just beginning their journey. And luckily, it's caught on a little bit, and it's allowed me to meet terrific people like Fabien and Ben, who I consider friends. They're both very knowledgeable. They're experts. Obviously, Ben has done it. Fabien is a wealth of knowledge, so I'm excited to learn alongside the rest of you.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And also, yeah, Tommy is basically a star influencer as well. Your YouTube channel is doing very good. You're very good at finding these property gems yourself. Like you are very good at finding these gem properties, and we'll talk about this later on, like how to find, interesting properties in France. Also for the audience, basically this session, how we'll do it, it would be a Q&A with questions with either received previously during this session when we send the invites, or questions we're being asked often, and then the panelists will then answer the questions. We'll then leave a small buffer to read some live questions as well. But don't worry, any unaddressed questions, we'll also share those with the panelists and obviously myself. And we'll also get back in touch after the show if we didn't answer your questions live. All that being said, also I would like, because you don't see her, but Nani is also there. So Nani is also with the Fab team. She's a US expat, so she's been in France for, I think I'll be wrong with this one, 25 years, Nani, or something like this. So she knows also everything. So she's from US Georgia, and so she knows about everything that you may have to go through yourself eventually, hopefully. Okay, to the question, I think we'll start with you, Ben.
Sure.
About the dream property in France, because that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
So questions that we're being asked very often is, can someone buy a property in France without a visa or a residency permit?
Such a great question, that, isn't it? Can you buy without a visa or a residency permit? Yes, is the quick answer, right? It's not. There are no real barriers in your way if you're looking to make the move. The journey is exactly the same whether you've got a full-time residency there in France or not. You're still going to have to reach out one day and send some euros over to the notaire for the deposit and completion. So nothing changes. The only thing to potentially think about is, depending where you are in the world, notaires, so the guys that are drawing up the contracts and making sure everything's clean, they have to report to a body called taxe in France, which is an anti-money laundering body. And so depending on the risk profile of the country, they may be asking more questions. The point is, it's all very possible, and actually, providing everything's coming from licit routes, you'll be absolutely fine.
So basically, from your perspective, what's the main or only roadblock? Like, is it like having a bank account, a French bank account, or?
Great question, Fab. Yeah, you don't even need a French bank account to sign on the dotted line. That's something that comes after. Obviously, it's way more practical to have a French bank account once you own the property and you're trying to live life through it. But to actually make the purchase happen, you don't need a French bank account. You can absolutely, as long as you're sending euros to the notaire, when the day comes, you're all set. And there are plenty of platforms that allow you to do that too before owning the French bank account. So
that's great. So basically, it's actually the other way around. Like, having a property can help getting a visa or a residency permit, but you don't need those then to get one. So it's great thing. So for the second question that we ask very often, I think Tommy can jump into this one as well. How can I find a property in France? I mean, do you have some pro tips to share, because you've been on this market for so long?
Sure.
I do, as somebody who has gone through this process already myself of searching. Let me say, first of all, if you're searching for a property, remember that the location in the country is more important than the individual property. And I can't stress this enough. A lot of people, it's very easy when you find out, the real estate search websites, which I'll show in a couple of slides. It's easy to see a property and just think, oh, it's just dreamy. Look how big it is. It's beautiful. It's got the giant stone French fireplace that I've always wanted. And falling in love with it without really understanding where it's located, what are the amenities that are close, If transportation is important, like train service, you know, you need to make sure that's covered. So location to me is the most important thing before you decide on an individual property. When you're actually starting your property search, there are a couple of websites that I always go to. And if you can see the slide here, there are three that I typically will start with. The first is seloger.com, and it's seloger.com. Seloger is the closest thing to a covering the entire country of France for property.
Yeah, that's like the biggest aggregator in France, indeed.
Yeah, so it's an aggregator site where agents from all over the country can upload their property, you know, features, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, all that kind of things, property photos. It's a huge database of properties. So I usually will start there, just that can give you a good sense of what prices are in a certain area, you know, per square meter, what the style might look like in various areas of the country. And then again, obviously what's available currently. Agence Newton is another one, which I like to go to. It's founded by Dan Newton, who was a British expat. And the thing I like about them is terrific property photos. The quality of the photos are
So you know that Ben's
outstanding.
mom works with Agents Newton.
I do, and
the family
his sister
as well.
Yes, exactly.
Jenny Small represent.
Ben, I hope the check is in the mail.
Yeah,
just kidding. Just kidding. No, but honestly, they are. One issue you'll see if you go to Seloger is a lot of agents who put properties up. I don't understand it sometimes. It looks like they went in like on a dark day that with their cell phone, they didn't turn any lights on in a property, and they just like snapped a bunch of quick photos and uploaded them. Agence Newton, and then the next one you'll see down, French Estate Agents, which is the Leggett Immobilier French website. They take the time to like do extensive photos, professionally done. The listings are very complete with, you know, here's how close it is to this area, here's how close it is to that area, here's some services close by. So these three are the ones I would start with if you're just beginning your journey. It'll give you an idea of, like I said, the price to value kind of ratio, and also the last two, while they have fewer listings than Seloger, they're very nice, and you know, they also kind of curate their properties to be a certain level of standard.
Ben,
really good overview, that, Tommy. I like your point about location first, and because you can quite easily fall for a property and then realize it doesn't necessarily fit your needs, your lifestyle. I think it's so important to, before you start clicking on the websites, you write down, you know, clearly, if you're doing it yourself, or you're doing it with your partner, or you're doing it with your family, write down exactly what kind of life you want to be living, and how's France going to make sense for you. Because it's actually quite a common feature in expat life. You'll move somewhere in your new country, and then realize that the spot doesn't work, and so then you have to go back through the whole move again. And obviously, you want to keep the amount of money you're sending to notaires and agency fees low. The best thing to do is really think that step 3 too.
And there's a forefront for like peer-to-peer transactions often. Do you know it, like Ben?
Is that Le Bon Coin?
Yeah, Le Bon Coin. But this one, to be honest, in theory, is not open to foreign customers, because you have to have a French mobile phone number to register to the website. But it's dedicated to peer-to-peer transactions, so you can have like kind of off-the-market offers. Yep. But it's mostly to find some gems as well. And again, well, you'd have some professionals who would post ads onto this website. It is by far the biggest website. But the thing is, it's like the Gumtree equivalent in the UK. You know, it's not only properties, it's vehicles. I mean, you know, well, you could sell your mom on that website probably. I don't know. Everything's on there.
Well, for the Americans watching, it is like Craigslist in the United States, which is just yeah, you're right. Peer-to-peer, you can sell a lawnmower on there or a house.
Well, it might be a
So
bit dodgier as well. No, it's like obviously.
yeah, and a lot of times,
anything's in
yeah,
there.
it's not, and again, we might talk about this more, but if you're a foreigner buying in France, it's worth paying a little extra to know you're working with a professional, that everything is above board and legally works, as opposed to trying to get the best absolute deal possible that ends up actually costing you more because you have to do renovations you didn't think you were going to have to do, or you're liable for them. So yeah, but that isn't a good site, again, just to get an idea of prices, what types of styles of houses are available. That can be a good choice.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I would never advise an expat to buy peer-to-peer in France, especially for a first transaction, because as you were saying and pointing out, it's very, very important. Then basically you almost have no recourse, no warranties, you would bear the whole liability in case something goes wrong. And we're not talking about buying a pair of socks here. So you're definitely better off go with the professionals, even if that means paying a few extra bucks, indeed. Okay, so let's deep dive into an even sexier topic for Ben. I think you loved this one. Maybe the audience have heard about this if you've been looking into France in regard to the taxes, and in one in particular that we call the taxe foncière. Ben, how much is the taxe foncière? When do we pay it? I mean, what is that thing?
Oh, I can see why you gave such an introduction to this one. The community taxes in France are quite a confusing subject. So taxe foncière is the equivalent of, I suppose, council or community tax. It's due to any owner of a property from the 1st of January of each year. And how do I break this down? Do I tell you how to calculate it and how much it's going to be, or what?
No, well, that was kind of a trick question, to be fair, because
I know.
Actually it's perfectly fair when buying a property. I mean, all the French, I would do that. So all the French would do it to actually ask how much is it, because it's not based on one's income or wealth or whatever. It's actually based on the property itself. And so, well, when buying, you can ask how much is the tax. Yeah. But so you never know, because it's literally on a village basis. Like each village determines, like, we want to tax, for example, I'm living by the coastline on the southwest of France. It's quite expensive because it's a touristic area, but should I go 20 kilometers inland, then the taxe foncière will just drop like a dead weight. So it really depends on how popular the place. And in theory, that pays for the amenities.
Yes, for the Americans, taxe foncière is the closest match to just what we would call a property tax. So it's a tax on the structure itself. Ben, I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but a lot of times when you purchase a property, obviously, rarely are you going to purchase it on January 1st, but often you'll pay the taxe foncière and then potentially get a refund of some prorated amount based on the date you purchase. But that's, for Americans, if you're thinking, well, what are property taxes in France like? Taxe foncière is the closest thing. And like in the United States, property taxes in where I live might be different from where you live, a different state, a different county, a different town. So it's hard. You can't just say, oh, well, it's X% or it's X amount.
Exactly. Yeah, no, you're right.
But I mean, there is an important thing to raise in it as well. So the pro rata calculation, because you get billed in like September, end of September, October time, right? So if you buy the property, the notaire is going to ask the buyer to
you receive it because you filed this with your national taxes like at the tax season, which is in May, and then you start paying it in September, like indeed. But as Tommy was pointing out as well, like very accurately, obviously if the transactions happens, you have a prorated refund or discount depending on the angle. Oh, you're right. But there is another one. Because this is France. That would have been too simple.
Too simple if there's just one.
I've heard about something else. The taxe
d'habitation. Yeah, which has gone through lots of. That used to be a bigger problem for expats buying, in 2005, right? It's gone through a bit of an evolution from certainly since COVID anyway. So this only really applies to second homeowners now as a result. It's an extra tax to pay if you're a full-time resident, if you're staying in France full time, then this no longer becomes an issue for you in the long run. But again, the calculations are done locally, and I'd argue the taxe d'habitation is far harder to work out, to the point where estate agents on the ground, if you were to ask the question, they invariably have to go and check and come back to you a couple of days later. Whereas the tax foncière
Sounds
is a
French.
bit more simple. Indeed, indeed.
And as Ben was pointing out, and this is also very important. So I do not pay taxe d'habitation on my main property, but I do pay it on second homes that I do have. So like any expat. So it's not an expat specific tax. That's what I'm saying. Every second homeowners would pay it. But the main property owner doesn't pay it. I mean, if it's your main property, you don't pay it. Okay. Any other pro tips or insights about, the usual expenses to consider for a property in France, apart from the obvious, like if you have renovation works and stuff like this, like maintenance?
Yeah.
One thing, well, I don't mean to jump in, Ben, but one thing, and I remember running into this myself, is some of the listings will say that a house is furnished or unfurnished. And in the United States, a lot of times that means like furniture, like including the couches and the, all that good stuff. But you need to be careful and ask the agent specifically what furnished or unfurnished means to them if it's listed that way. Sometimes it just means like the light fixtures and
there is a kitchen.
Yes, yes, and there's a kitchen, but maybe there's not, like the stove is not included. Other times you will find listings where it's like, oh yeah, everything you see in the pictures is included. So don't just read it, comes furnished and assume, oh well, everything I see here is included. I would speak to the agent. A lot of times, if it's not including furniture or other things, you can negotiate that. Say, hey, I love the way this looks. We'd like to, include this. What can we negotiate for that? I just know that's something I read once, and I was like, oh, that's cool. This thing is, 125,000 euros, and look at all this amazing furniture. And it was like, well, no, actually, it just comes with like the light fixtures, the cabinets, and that kind of stuff.
So it's a fun anecdote. Fun you mentioned that, because first apartment I got, and remember, it was near Nice in the southeast of France. And it was like a small studio. It was labeled, the ad was saying furnished studio. And I went there, obviously, and when I walked in, it was basically the kitchen and, a couple of cupboards, but no couch, nothing. And I thought I would just walk in and just drop the luggages and just settle in. No, I didn't. So, well, yeah, it was an unpleasant surprise. And obviously couldn't do the laundry. Nothing was there. So furnished doesn't mean furnished.
Actually, it's a really good point to think about too. So often expats will buy from other expats that have finished their cycle over there. And so people with non-residents, with second home in France are subject to an extra capital gains requirement. And quite often doing an inventory of goods in the property and selling them onto the new owner allows them to reduce that capital gains calculation. So definitely have that chat. Reason being is because the sellers do have an incentive to do so too.
What about, do you have any insight, or is there anything particular we should be concerned about the utility bills in general, like water, electricity?
Great question.
I know you've helped people actually open these.
Yeah, spend a bit of time because it's hard, right? If you're not in the country and you haven't got a French phone to dial through and get these things set up, so we'd happily jump on the phone with EDF and SAW, etc. The energy bills are a hot topic in the real estate world in France. Yeah, there's been so much new regulation coming in. Vendors are being held to far higher accountability now on it. So you do want to ask questions around insulation and what's heating the property. All these things have a big impact, as when you take the property on, you then take on that responsibility. So get that right. What can I think about? Oh yeah, the actual usage is an interesting one. Do you have this, Fab, down in the southwest like we did? But if you go for the lower energy output, the KWAs, and then as soon as you go over it, everything trips out in the whole house, and you sort of sat in the dark. And
well, I went for higher meters, you know, so yeah,
that was a smart move.
allowed use, because it's, I mean, it's like barely a couple of euros. I mean, you know, like the ongoing fee, because you have to pay it's a weird scheme. Like you have to pay a monthly fee. You're committed to a
It's so
monthly
weird.
fee. And then you
Yeah.
pay per kilowatt hour, indeed, like the
Exactly.
real consumption you've made.
So
But yeah, it's
start
weird. So
high.
I went for the upper one just in case, to be on the safe side. It cost me 2 or 3 euros extra per month, but at least I'm not bothered with this. So,
Yeah. My parents did the opposite. And yeah, we're living around candles for bits, just making life hard for yourself. Anyway,
That's called rustic, Ben.
yeah,
Rustic.
that's true. You're right. You're right.
Well, I mean, you're living a bit on the edge. So,
Yeah, no, we couldn't have the washing machine and the kettle on at the same time. Awful. Cold
well, I
cups of
remember
tea.
living with my grandparents. I've had that all my childhood, because they were always going for the lower. And if you had the microwave and a couple of appliances at the same time, I mean, it would, yeah, just go off.
Oh dear, those are the days.
And also, I don't want people to get scared hearing these stories. Like, France is a very modern country. There's modern standards, so a lot of the properties, at least that I show, are old properties. And one of the things you would definitely want to budget for, I mean, you obviously get it inspected and figure out what all the punch list is going to be, but you know, electric, things like that. There are a lot of things that you would just want to upgrade anyway, because you would want it to be efficient. You want it to be up to standard. Some of the most beautiful places are the older places. So you would want to know, like, when was it last done? Again, what's the expected cost of this? If I upgrade it, how much could I potentially save on the actual utility bill, and budget for that.
So that's the interesting thing, Tommy, these days, because the vendors have to bring the property up to standard to meet the energy ratings. You see a big drop in properties in that bracket, because it's anticipating the work that comes in. So the market has adjusted pretty quickly to it. Still some really good deals out there. Plus the technology's improved. You know, big trend back home around the pompe à chaleur. Fab, I don't know if.
Oh yeah, I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
Heat
for two
pumps.
reasons. I mean, one was ecological indeed, but the other is just simply, it's not Spain, but France getting hotter, like pretty much the whole planet. So air conditioning as well. We being Americanized a bit, which for me is a good thing, because and when it was hot, it was hot. I mean, France was not air conditioned most of the time. I mean, at least 20 years ago, but now most places would have air conditioning, at least in the south of France. And yeah, but that's it's a valid point. Yeah, so just maybe a small thing, because a question from John that I think is relevant to answer right now, regarding the real estate commission, who pays, buyer or seller?
So that can actually, I mean, yeah, it comes out of the net vendor at the end. So seller pays, but it's also, I always find it strange thinking about it in these terms, because ultimately it does happen quite a bit where the buyer would put an offer in that's below where the vendor wants it to be, and you can find an arrangement. The seller can find an arrangement with the estate agent to reduce their fees there to try and make it match. You know, that does happen. Not too much.
At the end of the day, we could say it's the buyer, because at the end of the day, it's part of the price.
Yeah.
But the buyer, usually when you have an ad on the real estate agent or property portal or something like that, it already includes the estate agent, doesn't it?
What is important, though, is when you think about it in these terms, it is the seller that's paying the agent ultimately. And so when you think about how these illegally the arrangement's set up, ultimately the estate agent's first focus is to make sure the vendor's interests are covered. So you shouldn't feel anxious about putting offers forward or anything like that, because you have to fend for yourself in the first stages. And the estate agent's obviously going to try and find a happy middle between everything, but legally. The
transaction fee, notary's fee, is never included, though. So that has to be paid extra.
Extra, correct.
And yeah,
good point.
But that's that bit that's not part of the ad usually.
Yep. I think I saw that question actually pop up. And that is important to know, that when you negotiate, you come to a final price, typically like 90% of the time, that payment is going to include the agent's fee. But then above and beyond that, there's what in the United States we would call closing fees, which is to pay the notaire, who's the legal, person who has to complete all the paperwork and file it. And within that fee is also any taxes that are owed on the transaction. So I don't know, if, Ben, if you want to, and Fabien, if you want to talk about that a little bit, but that's again is something else you want to budget for.
The notary, well, that's something I like to say, because technically, I don't know if it's French specific, but so technically this is a private agent, is independent. However, his fees or it's not even monitored, they're regulated by the state, like almost enforced. So basically, the notary's fees aren't negotiable. This is what it is. It's often on all buildings. It's often 6.5%, 6.5 to 7%. But that's kind of a flat rate. It's not the same rate all the time, but it's fixed depending on the transaction, the kind of transaction. It's not something out for negotiation. That's what I'm saying. Unless I'm wrong, Ben.
No, well, you're right. But what you could, another layer to it is, so how do you choose a notaire and all these things, so that the seller's going to have their notaire, and that will be working. You can choose your own notaire too, and have someone else represent your side and help draw up the contract to your side, and then the notaires would split the overall fee together. So there's no extra cost to it. Doesn't matter where that notaire is, or it's a set fee. That's all imposed by the government at the top. Just worth remembering.
I've seen someone asking, is it custom to bargain on the prices shown? Oh yes, this is a Latin country. So the Latins completely different. We would just walk with both hands in our pockets and we're like, we have this. We'll negotiate based on the wind and the sun and whatever. Yes, always up for negotiation. Well, I mean, sometimes they won't negotiate with you, maybe, but it's always something that's completely culturally accepted, I would say.
I would add to that, just this is something when you're looking at properties, say you've narrowed them down to a group, something to ask the agents on each property is, how long has it been on the market? Have there been reductions in price already? You can do your own research when you find out where it is. Like, is this a touristy area? Is it the center of a town? There are a lot of those factors which will lend themselves or not lend themselves to negotiating. If a property's been on the market for 2 years and you've seen multiple price reductions, there's a good chance that the seller is anxious to get out of it.
Or dead.
So that can give you some more negotiating room. Whereas, some people will ask, well, is it customary to like bid 5% or 10% below the asking price? And it's like, well, if it's in Biarritz near the coast, no, they're going to be like, no, the price is what it is, and you better get in today because it's going to sell. So you just have to take those things into account. But overall, yes, negotiate just like you would if you're an American, just like you would in the United States.
I've also seen a question from Kate. Do you help customers with connections to renovation upgrades? Maybe Tommy, because the question was addressed to Tommy. But also, just in case, Kate, in July, we're actually having a webinar on this topic and inviting a renovation company on the webinar. So you can ask a question to the pros directly, but maybe Tommy, I don't know, maybe you have discovered as well.
I don't have, I shouldn't say that. I have one contact who I think we all share, who will offer renovation services, and that's expanding not only in the southwest of France, but further afield. But that is one thing. Some of the real estate agents, particularly Agence Newton and Leggett, they've been doing this long enough, and the majority of their clients, I think, are expats. They're going to have each agent, who's spread around the country will probably have their own contacts for, these people did this for these other 2 clients that we sold to.
And to be fair, I really think, like, I'm reasoning as a Frenchman here, but it's always better, because if someone can work for renovations, I'm saying architects and stuff, this is different. But if we're talking about renovations, if you source locally, that's always going to be, I would say, better and cheaper, because all these renovation companies that can work nationwide, you have to pay for this. At the end of the day, the client is paying for them to go from A to B. And, France is kind of a big country, although I know it's barely the size of Texas, but still for us, this is a big country. So usually my advice is to source locally and actually ask the real estate agent who he knows in the area, because very often, like you were saying, they'll know someone around the area.
The other thing about doing it that way, doing it locally with somebody is, as you'll see as you explore all the pictures and look at the different areas of France, there are just different styles of construction in different areas. So you're going to have expertise with, the stone houses in Brittany are different than the, stone houses in the South. The look is different. The architecture
and the tiles,
somewhat
the
different.
tiling on the roof is different depending on where you are.
So somebody local, who has done this, it's not like they're going to have a learning curve for getting you up to speed.
I've seen a question, Nani answered it, about electricity bills and the kind of providers we'd be using. So without digressing too much on the topic, but as an expat, at least, the first years, I would strongly suggest you stick with Enedis, which is the nationwide provider, simply because, the energy crisis was a very good example. They guarantee their rates. So even if the prices skyrocket for whatever reason, another crisis hit, whatever, you're guaranteed to have the same prices for years. And I would strongly suggest to stick with these guys at first, or that kind at least, because you have private providers which also would guarantee the prices based on the national provider, which is Enedis. But I would rather stick with these guys rather than shopping around, at least at first, until you're comfortable and familiar with the local market. That was, just a small. Speaking of, because we spoke about renovations, and there is also something that's not French specific, but I think it's only in France that we made it mandatory. Actually, two types of insurance policies which are mandatory, which is the 10-year insurance on renovations or construction jobs or works, and also something called the dommage ouvrage if you're doing a bigger kind of renovation or job. But they both basically are 10 years insurance. Ben, do you know about it? Okay, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, it really did shake up the expat communities, because typically you'd be using an English-speaking context that's been there for a few years longer than you and has learnt the ropes. But when this became legal, it really did break up. It's a legal requirement for artisans to provide a separate document to guarantee their work, right? So not only should you be collecting receipts these days on the work done, because when you come to sell the property later on, the notaire is going to ask for it. You should be asking for this policy too. Because if you don't,
when doing a renovation job, whatever the job, even painting,
whatever, it was painting, exactly. But the scary thing is, even if you wanted to declare the work done by yourself on the property, you would need to provide a document.
So that with the dommage ouvrage. So or it's not insured and it kind of drops the price of your property. So when you're buying, for example, this is a good tip. Like if you know that some renovation job or any kind of work has been done past 10 years, ask for the copy of the policies, because basically even if you bought the house from the seller, you're still insured and you still have kind of a warranty on those jobs. So that's an important thing and protection you have for free. And even if the builder went bankrupt or is no longer in the market or in the trade, you can still claim as long as you have a copy of the policy. So it's actually something that protects the client and the consumer. So it's very, very good. So every time you see someone, because also we know, we've all seen these people. I think all countries have these guys, knocking on doors and say, I can do the paintings, or your house needs some refreshing, whatever. Make sure you ask for that 10 years insurance first. Because it's mandatory again. So those who don't have that, they're doing something illegal. And also then you can weed out the guys who are not, might be a bit dodgy.
It's a difficult balance though, right? Because it does, typically people that have paid for that policy are also playing by the book across the board. And so when they're pricing jobs, they may tend to be a little bit more expensive. So basically I can see people listening to this going, well, I might take the chance on the odd job, but anything majorly structural, you just can't mess around with it. You have to, if you have a pool built and that pool leaks somewhere and the new owners of your property could come and hunt you down and you would be liable for it. So
but for big jobs, I would strongly suggest you make sure they're insured, so that you can sleep sleep at night. And actually, something in relation to that as well is that part, well, same as many countries though, but part of the transaction process when you're buying or selling, buying a property in France, there is a property survey as well in France, isn't it?
Yeah, although not in the same way that we see them back in the UK, and I know back in the States too.
Yeah,
So
it's not the same.
I mean, just clarify it. I mean, in the US, they'll be checking all kinds of stuff,
Yeah,
safety of the
typically,
property and
yes, exactly. And it usually has to be done by an independent third party inspector, licensed inspector, just to, you have to check off a bunch of boxes.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, whereas in France, it's more. There's some logic behind it. I'd say there's some method in the madness in that it's not so much the structural piece. It's more the diet. So you'll be running diagnostics on the property for termites, the termites in the area. We spoke about the energy stuff earlier. The energy ratings super important.
Although if this was obvious, or that you can say that they could have seen the clues that you may have had a termite infestation, for example, in the property, and you buy it and they failed to mention it, then you would have a recourse against the inspector, not the seller. So it's kind of a protection, although it's not as comprehensive as a job as you're used to in the UK. I mean, to clarify, it's like 250 euros the inspection. Yeah. So you can imagine the kind of work that's being carried on for that kind of price.
Rocks up with a checklist and goes through. You got,
but that's the seller who pays for this, by the way.
Yeah, it's important. The seller that pays for it. And we'll talk about that later on different types of contracts, and to make sure the work's been done.
Okay, well, we're doing good. Maybe we'll do a small break. The audience is not exhausted or dead already. I think we can go for a couple surveys. Nani, maybe you can shoot the first poll about what's your plan. We're curious to know why you're listening to this webinar, if you don't mind. Oh, you have some solid numbers, huh? It's good. Seems like most of you would like to move to France. It's actually, more than half of you, and a good quarter is considering a second home in France. That's very, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, it's good. Very good. Okay, maybe we can stop this poll, and we'll overreach a bit. Maybe we can send a second one, knowing like, when would you like to make that dream reality? Is it like a short-term plan, mid-long-term plan? Maybe you want us to send you a check before you can make the move. I don't know. Oh, okay. Oh, that's well balanced. That's very well balanced. Okay. So we have all stages in the audience. That's great. That's great. That's basically 5 answers. We pretty much have 1/5 of the answer per of the response per answer. That's great. Good question. Good. Okay, good. Very good. Thank you for answering the polls. I think it's time we address, because we discussed the property itself, but I think it's time we address the buying process, itself. In France, so we mentioned this already, but real estate transactions are processed by a guy or girl, but like someone named a notaire. We've described what a notaire is, but maybe Tommy, Iban, just so we understand exactly what's his role. I mean, who chooses the notaire? I mean, how does it go?
Ben, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I look at notaires as an agent of the state simply collecting tax. That's the primary function. which differs quite a lot to what we're used to again in the States and in the UK, because you would lean on solicitors and lawyers, you know, to make sure everyone's interests are being protected. These guys, the mindset's not quite the same. They'll pull the contract together, make sure everything's legal, and but their main focus is making sure they're collecting all the information so that the state's collecting the tax that is
And
due.
I think that's something that could be, we will deep dive into these topics a bit later, but the notaire oversees the whole process. This is a very secure process. And actually, the notaire will escrow the funds.
Mm.
So he won't release the keys and the contract unless you've paid for the property in full, and vice versa. Obviously, the seller will not get the money from the notaire unless you've confirmed everything on your end, you know, the buyer. So it's a very secure process. Thanks for that guy who acts as an escrow agent in between. And as he has no vetted interest in any of the parties involved, it's kind of independent. So it makes the process quite secure, I think, I would say.
And Fab, just to clarify for the American audience, the notaire or notary is much different, as Ben mentioned, from what we're used to in the United States. My kind of vision of a notary is like, if I need a signature witnessed and I can go into a bank and say, hey, is somebody here a notary? They'll, you know, stamp it, watch you sign, things like that. A notaire in France is more of an like Ben mentioned, a lawyer, an attorney. They're go through much more extensive training. They have to pass a test. I think I don't know if is it limited? Like you can only have like notaires for certain areas. It's not like.
No, you could use any notaire you'd like. It's just that usually it's convenient. Very often that's the seller that knows a notaire and will use these guys because it's nearby. But you can use anyone. And actually, there's a question in relation to this that I wanted to address. The guys, obviously, we're talking about legal processes here, and some guys are concerned about, well, if I don't speak French and all these documents then will be written in French. There are notaires. Well, actually, I would say more like solicitors in this case, but there are lawyers and solicitors who actually can act as an intermediary in between you and the notaire. This is completely okay, so that you can deal with someone that's English speaking. Of course, some notaires also in France, you find some notaires who do speak English, but very often you'll be probably dealing with a notaire in the French countryside who doesn't speak English. So it's good to know that there are people who can deal in English, and you can choose. So not really new. Well, usually that's the seller. Again, it's like a custom. The sellers choose the notaire, but you can also have your own. For example, I'll just take an example. Myself, I have my notaire when I'm buying a property. I'm dealing with the seller's notaire, and my notaire and his notaire are just talking with each other. I don't talk with his notaire. I don't talk with the seller at this stage. They just manage together. So it's completely fine. And even if that was at the other side of France, my notaire would deal with the seller's notaire as well. So instead of a notaire, you could have a solicitor that speaks English. That's fine. It needs to be someone legally accredited.
Also worth remembering, because I don't see people use this enough. So notaires get paid when the transaction actually goes through, right? Right up until that point, they're free of charge.
That's right. That's right.
They are agents of the state. They are here only really to collect tax, but they do know an awful lot. And if you ask them, then they're obliged to help you protect your interests as much as possible. So you may as well find your own notaire, and you may as well badger them as much as you want to make sure that you've got everything crystal clear in your mind before you sign the dotted line. People don't, but you really should, because it's free.
Yeah, and something. So although you could do that with a lawyer, someone else, the notaire in France is the guy that you would typically go to actually write your will. And because I've seen the question in the Q&A about, is it true that we can have a British will and that take care of French real estate? No. And actually that's valid all across the globe. You know, US, UK, France, a piece of real estate will follow inheritance law based on the country it is in. So you may be American and have an American will. the piece of real estate in France will follow French inheritance law. So you need a French will for that real estate. And same for the UK, pretty much well, as far as I'm aware of, pretty much the same all across the planet.
Yeah, the estate planning could be a whole another webinar maybe we could do at some point.
Yeah, because there's a lot to discuss about this. Just one thing, because this one I think is an interesting kind of question. If I wanted to buy in Bitcoin, I don't think France is very crypto friendly. It is taxes and stuff, no problems. You can do many things in cryptocurrencies in France, but not buying real estate. They're not very crypto friendly in that regard, as far as I'm aware of. I've seen a couple agencies trying to make the headline saying that they can accept this. It's usually through the services of a third-party provider like a bank, a crypto bank, or some stuff. So
I would say you can definitely buy in crypto as long as you convert to euro first.
Yeah. But yeah, if you sell the cryptos into euros, then yeah, indeed. So yeah, that's technically doable because again, France has a very clear tax and taxation regulations around cryptos. Yeah. And also Louise asked about does the buyer and the seller require different notice? We've just addressed this, but as she re-asked the question. So no, you can use the same. No, it's a custom that you may use one each, because if you don't speak the language, it's probably better to have one that does speak the language and deal with this one. And then your notary will then deal with the sellers, but you don't have to. You can use the same. Okay. So another technical question, because I mean, we're up to this. So I don't know, Ben or Tommy, what is a compromis de vente then?
Tommy, do you want to go for it or shall I?
Well, my French is not great, but I'll just say this in general, the process, the actual real estate purchasing process is very similar to what it is in the United States and probably in the UK. It's just different. Like the names are different, but the general stages are, you find a property, you make an offer. When the offer is accepted, there is the compromis de vente is a contract which is written up. It's going to have all the basic information, the identities of the buyer, the identity of the seller, description of the property, like what's being, what's the actual transaction property going to be, the price. Anyway, that's exactly the same in the United States. When you make an offer, an official offer, it's going to take the property off the market so other people can't necessarily swoop in and buy it, and gives the buyer a chance to do some due diligence and until you move on to the next stage. Do you want to add to that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, before you get to the compromis the vente stage, you're going to be signing promesse d'achat, so it sort of semi-committing to, you're putting your name against an offer, so to speak. But really, the compromis de vente is the first and most important contract you're going to sign. So you want to have asked all your key questions before you sign that document, because after that point, you'll only have 10 days. Yeah, you have 10 days cooling off period, which gives you sort of grace to pull out, and you'd be asked to send a deposit across, so between 5 and 10%. The interesting thing, actually, if we're talking about compromis de vente, thinking about it, is estate agents can produce a compromis de vente. So not just the notaire can too, but estate agents will, if they have the required licenses too, they will pull one together because they can be a bit more efficient. And only a notaire can provide a promesse de vente. So it's a similar looking contract in the face of it, but slightly stronger, I would argue, a promesse de vente. And if you can ask for a promesse de vente, I would, simply because if the vendor tries to pull out, the notaire won't need to get a huissier, a bailiff involved to reclaim the funds back. Um,
So it's more secure for the,
it's
yeah, okay.
way more secure for all parties, really. I think everyone should be asking for promesse de vente.
It's
when they
better to
can.
deal with the notaire rather than the estate agent.
Exactly.
Okay.
Also for the Americans and Brits, obviously these contracts in general are going to be in French. It is definitely worth budgeting and paying to have things translated if you're not fluent in reading, to make sure don't just take the estate agent's word for it, or the seller's word for what's in it. Make sure you get things translated, understand, again, it's a contract, it's a legally binding contract, so buyer beware.
Yeah,
that's
it's a very good advice. This is something we do often at Fab. We introduce them to often solicitors in the UK who will act as an intermediary to first so that they have someone that speaks English, but also to translate everything from the notaire. So basically, so that the buyer only deals with documents and people in English. You can do everything in French, but there is a risk, as you were saying. These legal documents, so
and
you don't want to be caught up.
The tech bros try to say otherwise. I'm still not convinced ChatGPT can really translate the nuances across. It's super important because in the compromis de vente, you're going to be including all kinds of clauses, pending property sale back in the US or back in the UK, subject to mortgage, or say you had your own independent survey come in on the renovation job you're looking at, and you want the vendor to sort things out. So that would be an added clause in there too. If this isn't translated properly and you're not picking these things up, those 10 days roll by and you're committed to the purchase, whether you like it or not. So
it's just a side question, because these are questions I'm saying often in the Q&A box. I think this one is more for Ben, but I've seen quite a few questions about mortgages, and from people from the US, from the UK with foreign income from abroad. It's asking, can I get a mortgage to buy a French property with income from the US and the UK? Maybe Ben, you have a bit of insight onto this topic.
Yeah, speaking to banks all the time on this topic, it's a really frustrating one still right now. Ultimately, banks are having a hard time making money on mortgages these days. They're lending funds out, so the overall size of the project needs to be big enough. And when I say big enough, property needs to be over 350,000 euros right now. I'm seeing most declined underneath that barrier, full stop. And then they're asking for non-residents for extra collateral, putting into investment products and savings accounts to try and balance it out, because they're viewing it and saying, well, we know interest rates are going to be dropping in the coming years. And the thing is, in France, rates aren't variable. Fabien, on the properties you've bought, hopefully you bought in the early 2020s when the interest rates were minimal, right? Exactly. Okay, so it's really, really tough. You need to have at least 25% loan to value ready to put down, plus the extra collateral to put in. So if to put, last one we worked on was a chalet in the Alps for 450,000 euros. Had to put 75,000 euros down for the initial deposit on it, and then an extra 60,000 euros in a saving account with the bank to keep things fluid. So it's tough. It's tough out
there. There's a question that's interesting. Like, if you pay in cash, can you bargain for a lower price? So as Tommy was saying, well, there's always room for negotiation, but it also, at the end of the day, it boils down to where the property is. If it's in a busy area where, for example, in my area, I know that usually, as this is a touristic area, again, by the coastline, they're usually sold within a couple of weeks max, and at the price, at the ask price. So there's no room for negotiation most of the time. If you're living in a more rural, if you're looking in more rural France or in suburbs or, different places where, well, as Tommy was saying, the property might have been on the market for a bit longer, then yes, there is room for negotiation. And the fact that you may be a cash buyer instead of having a mortgage, then basically you're guaranteeing the fact that the seller that it could happen very quickly. So that indeed is something that can help the negotiation. I suppose same as the US or the UK. This is the same, isn't it?
Yep. I would also, on the flip side, if you require a mortgage, like if you're doing this in America and you look at it and you think, oh, you know, I could buy this place for $250,000 as long as I could get a mortgage. You need to really investigate that. Like Ben says, it might not be, I just wouldn't want somebody to get down too far down the road and just assume that, you know, because they have good credit, you know, credit rating in the United States, or they have some other assets, that there's just going to be, oh, well, of course I can get a mortgage. You need to really investigate that up front before you get too far down that road and then realize, oh, wait, like maybe this is not possible. And you've, you know, wasted 3 or 6 months or a year. That's one of the reasons when I started looking into this, I kind of homed in on the cheap, you know, quote unquote, cheap houses. Doesn't mean, you know, they're not decent houses in good spots, things like that. It's just, you know, lock up and leaves, kind of relatively smaller properties, is because if you can avoid having to get the mortgage, it can speed everything up. It also typically compounds. If a smaller place is good, the utilities are going to be less. The taxe foncière is going to be less.
Everything's going to be cheaper.
Not absolutely, you know, every time, but if you can, I don't know, taper your expectations and turn a you know, relatively cheap property into your like special space, but then as we talked about at the beginning, you have a ton of stuff around you. You have maybe a train station not far away. You have a bike greenway nearby. You have a river that you can go canoeing and kayaking on, where you're not just going to go sit there and be in this home 24/7. You're going to be out doing stuff, meeting people, going to festivals, wineries, all the amazing things that France has to offer. It can be a double win, because you're pay less for it up front and also speed things up because you can pay in cash, if that's possible.
Well, a very good example to illustrate what you're saying, because we're currently looking, my wife and I, into a second home in France, and would like to buy a small building with apartments in it. We found one in the town we live in, Cabreton. Cabreton is sitting at the exit of an highway, right? And it's by the coastline. We found a building, 300 square meters, 2 million euros. Exact same property, so the building is brand new, everything is in pristine condition inside, great location, great apartments, but 2 millions. We found the exact same building, well, obviously different building, but something 300 square meters in Saint-Jour-de-Marennes, which is still by the highway. I mean, I take my car, it's 12 minutes on the highway. So it's very close, technically speaking, but it's inland. It's no longer by the coastline. 350,000 this time. And both are in almost brand new. Exact same piece of real estate, exact same surfaces. And you go from 2 million to 350, just driving 15 minutes down the highway. So it's just to illustrate your point. It's not when we say cheap properties, technically. So that building for me now looks cheap in contrast to what I have on the coastline. But it's not a cheap building. It's a brand new building. It got tons of there's like 7 properties in it, 7 apartments. It's fantastic. But because of the location, or thanks to the location in that case, you can actually have a much better deal. So this is to illustrate an actually like real life example, like today's example. Literally.
I think what you're speaking about there is projects, right? It's big projects potentially.
No, existing buildings.
I know, but in terms of an investment, it's a big project. It's drawn out. If you're looking to get financing on that as a non-resident, can you imagine the conversations at the back? Like it's so much back and forth. I typically, when people ask me about mortgages before we go through putting our head in the oven and trying to get something out of French banks, look at your options back home first. Refinancing and sort of have the conversations, but back home. It could marginally be more expensive. I don't think it would be that much more expensive though, firstly, and it would save you the headaches. Most importantly, it will clarify whether your project is feasible or not, because banks in the US, banks in France, banks in the UK, they're asking the same questions. So run it through back home
yeah.
first.
And to get back
And-
to the initial list of questions, so you mentioned putting on an offer, Ben, I think during like at the compromis de vente, basically stage.
Yeah.
Is it mandatory actually to pay a deposit, and how much is it usually?
Yeah, but notaires will tend to ask between 5 and 10%. And from my experience tells me it's pretty arbitrary whether they ask between one or the other. What's important to remember though is that if you were to pull out and you've only paid 5%, the notaire will come and ask for the extra 5.
Okay.
So yeah, I suppose there's a cash flow benefit potentially to not doing, and the same works back the other way. So you've paid 5% to the notaire for at the point of the compromis de vente, and then the seller pulls out after the 10 days. Well, you've only paid the notaire 5%, so you'll get that 5% back, and then the notaire will
Also, what
instruct
you're
the vendor.
saying
Sorry.
that you could pull off during the cool-off period, obviously, but then afterwards as well, but then you lose the deposit.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And you'd be required to pay up 10%.
Okay. So better have made up your mind before.
For sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And there's another word like the acte de vente. If I'm correct, it comes after the compromis, kind of the final contract. Then you're exchanging contracts basically, and then the property is yours. But how long the process takes until you can get that acte de vente?
Oh, yeah. It's quite drawn out, isn't it? Between compromis being drawn up and then the acte de vente being signed. Yeah, property completion in France is 2 to 3 months. Yeah, and you're doing well at that pace, I'd say. And the act is. It's why I say the compromis is so important. I think it's the contract, the compromis, and the act is basically a mirror image of everything that sits in the compromis. But it's getting the tick marks next to all of the things that needed to be checked. So yeah, the money's arrived, it's come from safe places and not, I don't know, Pablo Escobar's cousin. The diagnostics have all come through clean, and everything sort of checks there. It's basically the notaire listing off saying, yes, all the work's been done.
By the way, when you have the acte de vente, the notaire will give you a document called the acte de vente authentique, which is basically proof of ownership of the property. That's the document you will need to apply for a visa or a residency permit. So also like kind of disclaimer here, well, you need to have gone through the process because before you can use that address for any legal purposes in France, including open up a bank account or...
So the compromis wouldn't work in this scenario?
No, I wouldn't.
Interesting. Despite the
because
fact
you can pull off. You can pull out.
Yeah. Interesting.
And just to clarify for anybody who's like brand new to investigating this, to get a long stay visa in France, you have to show that you have accommodation in France already. So that would be a signed lease as a renter, or as Fabien just mentioned, proof that you own property there. And that has to be as part of your visa application. You can't, as far as I know, you can't use a Airbnb, no hotels, things like that. It is supposed to be a long...
No, although if we're being honest, well, you're 100% correct, Tommy. We're being honest, depending on where you come from, for example, the US, they tend to be a bit more flexible at the French visa centers in the US. So we see some applications using Airbnbs being accepted. But this is very, very, very important to emphasize on this. Like, you're not supposed to use that. So if they want, they can reject the... So I would strongly suggest to get the proper accommodations like the ones you mentioned. Although UD people say, oh, I've used an Airbnb and was accepted. Yes, they are a bit more flexible. But I would stick on the legal side just to be on the safe side. Okay, I think we've covered most transactions. Maybe Nani, if you're still with us and didn't fall asleep, which I'm seeing you answering all of the questions, so I'm sure you're not. Can you launch the last poll about give us an estimation of your budget, maybe, so we can see if you're within the budget that Ben mentioned, for mortgages potentially, or just to give us an idea of the kind of plans you have when you move or buy property. Oh, that's interesting. Very good. Very good.
Ben, I see a question for you, and because I had this question before, which is kind of the logistics of sending that deposit. So if I'm an American, I have some money in the bank, or I've sold my property in the United States and have that money sitting there, and I'm going through this process, and they say, oh, all right, you made an offer, you need to put your 10% down. What are the logistics of getting my US dollars into the notaire's escrow account in euros?
Oh, thanks for highlighting that one, Tommy. Yeah, that's pretty much my day to day. The logistics of it. So you can ask if you're lucky and you've got a US bank that's used to making this kind of transfer. Your bank might be able to make payments over to the notaire. So the notaire is going to ask you for the 10% along with their relevé d'identité bancaire, so their RIB it's called, which will have an IBAN on it, an international bank account number. And so you go back to your US bank and say, "Hey guys, I've got to send these euros. Can you make the payment across?" Where it gets a bit complicated is firstly, we've all got our own banking systems. You've got the connection accounts in the States, and I don't know, wire transfers and ACH networks, and they don't necessarily tie up overly well with the notaire's bank in France, and same with the UK. So your first challenge is there, and then the second piece is, well, how much is it going to cost to get that over? And there's often a hidden charge there in the exchange rate at still. So because the banks are going to see this money leaving your accounts, and sure, for the deposit it's a smaller amount, but then on the larger, if it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, they may never see in their account ever again. They're not necessarily commercially interested or have any vested interest in helping you out with that, and so you could be slapped with an extra charge of 2, 3, 4% on hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is where we as a currency broker come in to try and slash that cost down as much as possible, and get it over to the notaires in time. The final complication is, I think I mentioned before about the money laundering checks. So La Caisse des Dépôts, which is the notaire's bank, it's closely monitored by Tracfin, which is the anti-money laundering body. And so they're asking questions all the time about where these funds are coming from. And to avoid any delays there, you want to get ahead of the game and ask for a form called Attestation de Provenance de Fonds. I'll write it in the chat, actually. But that's essentially saying you're getting your bank in the US to say, okay, I know, Mr. Smith here is a good guy. I've worked with him for X amount of years. I know his funds have come from safe places, and it'll be all good to pay for a property over in France. I mean, it's like, I didn't know any of these were issues when we were living in France at the time. It's only when you actually go ahead with the purchase that you come across all these hurdles, and it's a bit of a headache.
That's very good.
Can I just mention also, I don't think it's an issue necessarily in France, but I know for Italy that I've heard some horror stories. Don't ever just send money to someone like the seller. If they say, oh, well, we'll take this off the market if you send us 10%, wire it to this account. Don't ever send large sums of money without making sure it's going through a professional via legal channels and that can be traced easily. Again, probably not an issue in France, but again, it's just, these are important decisions. You don't want to turn your potential dream into a nightmare by doing something rash or before really investigating. And again, it doesn't need to be super complicated, but if something feels a little sketchy, or again, you go on the Craigslist of France and again, it just doesn't feel right, go with your gut. better to be safe than sorry, especially with a dream property purchase like this.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's worth, at least for the first purchase and transactions or the first years you're in France, use the services of professionals. That won't cost you that much more, but then everything will be super secure, because at the end of the day, like you're saying, France is a super safe and secure country. Everything it processes, anti-money laundering laws and stuff. Everything's very secure, but that doesn't mean that scammers aren't around. So it's better to be protected. I think we've done well. Just to say, thanks everyone for watching this event. I will share all of the questions you've asked with the speakers, so that I can answer you directly if you left us your email, obviously. And I'll also send you to all of the registrants a follow-up email with the opportunity to speak directly with Ben or Tommy. I'll share the details that they're comfortable sharing with you guys. So you can get in touch afterwards. This is the weekend and we're in France, so we'll be having the apéro now, but I'll do that probably on Monday. So you'll have this on your mailbox next week. And thanks a lot. Can we just thanks our panelists, Ben and Tommy. Thank you a lot for all your precious insights.
Thanks for having us, Ben. Great fun.
I'll say thank you for hosting, Fabien and Ben. Always good to see you. I always learn something being around you guys.
That's been fantastic. That's been fabulous.
Thank you to Nanny.
That's been fabulous. Yeah, thanks to Nanny as well. Thanks for you guys for watching. And we'll get back in touch next week. Until then, take care and see you soon in France.
À la prochaine. Cheers, guys.
Au revoir. Bye.
Au revoir.